When the internet first emerged as a major technology in 1995, the US made a key decision which benefited it tremendously. They decided that the internet was a brand new technology with tremendous potential, and they chose not to regulate it the way the old telephone system had been regulated. And the result was, instead of taking old rules written 75, 100 years ago and applying them to this brand new opportunity, they created new rules that regulated in some places but allowed investment and allowed creativity to flourish. And the result was a vibrant economy in which the US has invested 2 to 2.5 times per household in broadband speeds. And if you look at the benchmark 30 megabit speeds in the US versus the Europe, they've consistently been about 50% more households that have availability of high-speed broadband. But the US is now at a crossroads. In the wake of the last election, where the Democratic Party suffered a defeat, their administration signaled a change in policy, where they're considering once again to follow the example adopted by most other countries, to continue to start to impose regulation, telephone-style regulation on the internet. And the worry is that this will cause investment to decline. The digital single market is a huge opportunity for Europe. I see it as part of a 50-year commitment globally towards liberalization of trade that goes back to the general agreement on trade and tariffs and the tremendous growth in the world economy that's been associated with that. And that principle behind free trade is that a free flow of goods and services will cause the entire global economy to rise, benefit everyone. And I think it requires a huge commitment by countries because, in fact, those kinds of changes can be can cause certain industries to face competition that have never faced competition before. And they have to adjust and they have to become faster. But in a sense, in the internet age, refusing to change is not an option, because if you protect the domestic economy, you'll simply be left behind. In fact, I've spent some time in Japan, which was once a technical leader with companies such as Sony, creating the greatest televisions in the world. And there, a country of 120 million people became very inwardly focused, and they have been left behind. And they're saying that they need to emulate companies like Samsung, who've been more globally focused on the global markets and part of the overall trade in general IT sector. And I think that this is a valuable lesson for Europe, that they have an opportunity to open up the doors, to make it part of this great internet economy that's coming together. And that this is an opportunity that Europe is going to have to seize. They have to make sure that they don't let the people who are opposed to facing competition, to face change, which can be very disruptive, but yields tremendous benefits, to make sure that those benefits are continued to be allowed to occur. And the key for us is, as you mentioned, investment in broadband networks is absolutely critical. And what we've seen is that, there's a wonderful example in Spain, they deregulated high-speed services, and they saw a huge wave of investment, not just by the incumbents, but by competitive providers. Unfortunately, there's another part to the story. Earlier this year, the regulatory authority reversed its decision and decided to regulate high-speed services, and we saw the investment start to disappear. And so what you see in a risky world where you have to take a chance on new businesses, if you're in a highly regulated environment, it's very hard to take those risks.
Opinion.
I think that spectrum coordination is absolutely essential for the future of Europe. What's fascinating to me is I did a study of LTE deployments in 8 countries in Europe in particular and European-wide. And what I discovered is the more the nation states try to build customized policies on a country-by-country basis, the slower the auction happens, the later consumers get LTE. And in fact, many of the auctions raise 100 times less revenue for the benefit of the taxpayers. And so I think that a simple policy with flexible spectrum is a much better solution. The people who got LTE the fastest, often other companies were allowed to take spectrum for technologies like WiMAX or 2G LTE. When we're trying to move from 3G to 4G LTE, they said take the old spectrum, use it for new purposes. And the countries that had this dynamic, flexible approach tended to provide better services for their citizens much, much faster. Platform regulation is an issue globally. Other countries are interested in it as well, but it's so vague that it becomes running a danger of going against large companies, not because they're large, but just because they're large, not because they're doing something that's bad for consumers. In fact, we know in the internet age, large companies, of the 4 largest companies in the world, 3 of them are Google, Microsoft, and Apple. And we know these companies like Apple, people love Apple products because they're creating new markets and new uses with the iPhone that we never knew before. And so my worry is that we will lose we will use bad thinking that is not well disciplined by good principles, and we will lose much of the benefit of innovation. I do think there's potential concerns, but they have to be done, examined, analyzed in a proper way, instead of just saying, oh, this company is very large, we should be very concerned about it. They share a lot of similarities, some of them unfortunate. The big problem with network neutrality is how political it's become. It's become less about finding a balance and finding something that will really encourage innovation, and more about appealing to certain political constituencies with messages that sound very, very attractive. And it's very easy to say, oh, everything should be created equally. But what we learn on both sides of the Atlantic is that everyone who runs a network knows that you have to manage a network. There's just no other way to make it work. But more importantly, things like telemedicine, health apps should be given priority over a video download. And there's certain things that can be flexible and can wait, and there's some things that must absolutely get through. In many ways, I actually think that some of the debate that's happening in Europe is actually quite constructive. Some of the debates over the scope of what exceptions we're going to make, what are the reasonable accommodations to really help consumers get what they want. That's a very constructive part of the debate. But my concern on both sides is that the general direction has become more absolutist and less about trying to find compromise.